Here on the Colour of Country Life, FlowFM, it's great to be joined again by agricultural analyst at Rabobank, Dennis Voznesenski. I need to cue up the Johnny Cash, Dennis. You've been everywhere, man.
Yeah, that's right. I flew into Adelaide earlier this week and moved further north towards Wallaroo and Clare and Kadina and moving then east in a little while towards Berry and then down to the southeast field days. So, a little bit of everywhere.
You'll have to make a beeline at the southeast field days for the Flow tent where Wayne and Rob will be down there from our station and say g'day. But your voice is well known to our listeners, Dennis, all across our regional broadcast areas. We often talk about grains and canola and other pulses, but when it comes to just how the cropping season for next year is shaping up, what are you seeing on the ground in South Australia?
Well, if you look at Yorke Peninsula, I mean, for most of the area, and even if you go slightly further north, it's looking similar to last year in a lot of places. That's what farmers are saying. So similar to last year, in some places a little bit better. I'm yet to see what's happening in the southeast and further towards the Vic SA border further north of that. I was in Horsham last week, so in Western Victoria, and there, while it hasn't rained for a little while, the subsoil moisture is still quite phenomenal. So that will, if anything, that just means less herbicides are going to have to be used. So it's still quite beneficial moving into planting. And then when I was in central New South Wales 2 weeks ago, subsoil moisture is also good, but it is getting a little concerning that it hasn't rained in a lot of places since December. For now, no one's panicking, but if we get into, say, April and it still hasn't rained, then people are going to start getting concerned. There's always concern as well. If you got a lot of subsoil moisture that's too deep, then when you plant the seed, it can't actually get to the subsoil moisture, so that's a factor in as well.
There's always challenges, but according to all the weather authorities we're hearing from, La Nina is kaput, and maybe even we'll see a La Nina develop. But have they been accurate on these things before?
Oh, look. No forecast is ever perfect, but if you look at their 3-month outlook historically, for the last 3 years, where it shows what's the chance of above average rainfall, it's been blue for about 3 years in a row, and now suddenly it's all going orange. So just from the significant change, I think, from having above average rainfall and forecasting above average rainfall to now forecasting significantly below average rainfall, I think, at least as an indicator of where things are going, it's good. No forecast is ever 100% accurate, so it's not a one-for-one with reality, but at least it shows the direction of where it's heading.
Now, I notice you've been having fun on your social media, getting your drone up in the sky. You've been keeping an eye on the lentils in storage over on the Yorke Peninsula as well. How's pricing looking for them?
Yeah, look, actually, you bring up an interesting point. So there's a lot of lentils still around, but at the same time, there's not a lot of urgency to sell. And whether you look at wheat or barley or canola, whatever's left over, and it's not just in South Australia. You look at Victoria, look at New South Wales. I think farmers are in a pretty good financial position, and you have the season looking a little bit drier, so farmers are going, all right, maybe I'll wait a little bit, won't sell. And there's kind of this power to the grower right now where there's no urgency to sell, and that's keeping a lid on not a lid, keeping a bottom on pricing. If you look at lentils around the world right now, there's more supply than at this time last year. So Canada had a more decent crop compared to that drought-stricken crop it had the year before. So on the supply side, we're doing okay, and on the demand side, unfortunately, the countries who we usually export to financially aren't doing that well. So their currencies haven't been doing well. Their economies were hit hard by COVID, and they still haven't quite recovered. So from that perspective, we don't see large upside for lentils. But I was asking a friend of mine based in India, what do you think we should look at if there were to be upside? What could theoretically drive that in the year ahead? And he was saying, if we see this El Nino pattern cause significant dryness in Australia, it's on the East Coast and parts of South Australia, and it starts to mess with the seasons in India, Pakistan, with their monsoon. So they need the monsoon to bring the rainfall to then plant later in the year. If that happens, then we could see some upside. But for now, unless that does happen, it's limiting how much upside we can see.
We're beholden to the weather, Dennis Voznesenski from Rabobank, always on the land, but is there anything farmers are raising with you aside from weather concerns? I know input prices have certainly been running hot, but I had heard there was maybe a little bit of improvement on that front recently.
Yeah, well, look, if you ask farmers really right around the country where urea prices peaked last year, it was around $1,400-$1,500 per ton at its peak, but now whether you look at Central New South Wales or South Australia, you're seeing $700 per tonne, slightly even below that. So they've come down substantially. And then the question is always, well, how long can they go for being this low? And can they go back to the highs we saw last year? Well, in theory, they can go back to the highs we saw last year. It all depends on what happens with natural gas supplies from Russia to Europe. If they decide to cut it off tomorrow, then the cost of producing urea skyrockets in Europe, and they have to compete in the international markets and bid up the price of the urea we typically import. If none of that happens, well, still, in the not-too-distant future, the Northern Hemisphere is likely to start buying up urea, phosphate, potash. It's just they're coming to their seasonal time of year where they need to import this stuff, and that usually causes some price upside.
Yeah, so I must apologise to the listeners in my former lawyer's hat on. I asked a leading question there. What have the farmers been raising with you, the clients that you've been meeting, in terms of what their main concern actually is?
Look, I think a lot of farmers have been asking, yes, you're right, about lentils, but also what's happening between China and Australia and barley. They've been asking a lot about that. They've been asking about how Ukraine's going with all of its exports. And, well, it's not specifically a question they've been asking, but a pattern that I've noticed is just how much on-farm storage is being built for grain and for fertilizer over the last couple of years. It's really been phenomenal. And I think in the longer term, it is something that fundamentally changes how the industry functions.
Yeah, that's a great point you raise. I was wondering about on-farm storage, what you're seeing and hearing, because we've been talking with ABARES about that as well. I think they're looking to beef up their data collection because they usually traditionally rely on, the public or what used to be public storages, but now we've seen significant investment to hold it on-farm.
Yeah, well, the last time we saw data released on the capacity of on-farm storage was, I think it was either ABARES or ABS back in 2009/2010. And what I'm doing now is I'm going around to all of our branches around Australia. We have a really large network. And I'm asking them, what do you think in your area roughly has been the increase in on-farm storage, whether that's grain or fertilizer? I'm trying to get an understanding of, firstly, how much we have now, and secondly, why farmers are building it, because it differs significantly on where you are in Australia. So, for example, in northern New South Wales, southern Queensland, some farmers may be building it because they want to do grain blending. Some are building it in South Australia because they want to have different silos for different varieties of barley so they can take advantage of maybe higher price for a particular variety that's in short supply next year. So it really differs depending on where you are.
Certainly does, and it's always entertaining tracking what's happening in the market and what farmers are doing. It's great to have you visiting in parts of South Australia. Dennis Voznesenski from Rabobank, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Ricky.